This presentation is going to talk about instructional strategies, kind of how they fit into this design process, how they're used. I find that one thing that a lot of new instructional designers get confused with is how to actually use something like Gagne's 9 events. So I'm not going to go through and talk about what are instructional strategies, because I'm assuming that you're going to understand what like problem-based learning is, or at least you're going to go and learn about it, because I'm not going to define what that is in this presentation. My goal is to show you the relationship and show you how they're used. So for those of you listening, I'll just describe everything. For those of you watching this, you'll be able to see what I have up here on the screen so that you can kind of see the relationship of these different instructional strategies and how they're actually used together. So first of all, the first thing that I've done, which is a little different than other authors, is I kind of try to break up instructional strategies into two groups, and I call them either an organizational strategy or a delivery strategy, because they're used at they're used together, and I think people get confused in that if they're using Gagne's 9 events or an instructional strategy like that, they don't know how to incorporate something like problem-based learning into that, because a lot of times you will use multiple when you're actually developing, and I want to show you how that relationship works. So you can see up here on the screen, I have organizational instructional strategies. These are used to organize the course. They're really they're your skeleton, your outline. And I have the example of Gagne's 9 events here, because that's really the way I use Gagne's 9 events, and the way I teach it is that it's really an organizational strategy. It doesn't really tell me what I'm going to do with my content necessarily. It's more of a course guide. And it almost doesn't matter if I'm doing a lecture, if I'm doing computer-based instruction, I can incorporate pieces of Gagne's 9 events into that to help me structure and organize my course. I'll show it on the next screen and talk about it. Then I have my delivery instructional strategies. These are things that I actually use to, deliver content and design my actual content itself. And I call these, these delivery instructional strategies, some examples would be like Keller's ARCS model, or a lecture. A lecture is something that, I'm going to actually, or problem-based learning, game-based learning. I'm going to use these to actually deliver my content. So let me show you, first of all, on this next screen here, what I have is I have Gagne's 9 events and Dick and Carey's instructional strategies model. I have them both here, just first of all, so that you can see, and I'll describe it, the relationship between these two, because they're very similar. So Gagne's 9 events, the first few steps are to gain attention, inform the learner of the learning objective, and stimulate recall of prior knowledge. So very similarly, Dick and Carey, their first step is pre-instructional activities, where they gain attention, describe objectives, recall prior knowledge. So they're the same, right? And these are organizational things that you want to do. This is telling you, like someone who's new to developing instruction, like, oh yeah, I need to start out. I need to have my learning objectives presented to my audience, right? Whether you're doing a lecture, whether I'm developing computer-based instruction or teaching an online course, I need to make sure that, hey, I'm presenting my learning objectives first, right? Next, we have our content presentation. So Gagne defines that as presenting material, providing learner, facilitating learning, and eliciting performance and feedback. Dick and Carey describes that. They describe two parts: content presentation, where you present your content and examples, and learning participation, where we have practice and feedback. Very similar, right? They're basically the same, saying the same things. And then, so this is where we actually develop our content. This is where we take what we've done in our task analysis, and our objectives and our assessment items, and we say, okay, how do we actually develop this out now? How do we do this? We should have our organization structure mostly from our task analysis, which should tell us like this, if it's depending on if it's, procedural or hierarchical or however we want to do it, what is the order of this content? How do we present it? how are we going to do this? How are we going to structure it? Am I going to present some case studies? Is that how I'm going to, is this going to be experiential learning where they're going to go by experience? You know, what am I actually doing? This is where we start to use our learning theories and our, you know, we start to say, how am I really going to present this material? Then we have assessment. Gagne defines this as assess performance, and then enhance retention and transfer, and Gagne, Dick and Carey describe this as assessment, you know, pre-test, post-test, and follow-through activities such as memory aids for retention and transfer. So they're telling you to assess and make sure the students can take it with you. So they're both saying the same thing, but I just wanted to go through these. These are what I call the organizational strategies. These help you organize what you're, you know, the layout of the whatever you're developing, of your curriculum, your training, whatever you are developing. Next, I have my delivery strategies. So these are, hey, okay, so now that I know what Gagne's 9 events is, or Dick and Carey's instructional strategies are, I need to actually deliver this stuff. So what do I do? Do I just write a bunch of content out like an encyclopedia? Do I put it into some kind of PowerPoint presentation? What am I really going to do? What is the strategy to use to actually make this content interesting? So I've kind of on the screen here, you can see I've kind of on the left, I have Dick and Carey's organizational strategy. On the right, I have my delivery strategies. And I kind of have tried to align them a little bit with where they would actually fit in the model, but I'll go through and read it for those of you listening. And I want to kind of talk a little bit through that too with those of you watching. All right, so first step, we have this pre-instructional activities. This is where we motivate the learners, right? So an example of what I call a delivery strategy, and these are all in text going to be called instructional strategies. The first one I have is Keller Arcs, which is really a motivational strategy, right? So this is where we start to think about, okay, so I need to motivate, gain attention. Maybe I should start looking into some motivational theories. And this is where I would incorporate those motivational theories into my instruction. All right, next, we have content. Next step in Dick and Carey's organizational strategy, or Gagne's, is content presentation, where we have our content, we present our content, we have examples, learners participate, they practice, there's feedback. Okay, so how are we going to present that? This is where we incorporate, are we using a game? Are we going to incorporate some strategy like problem-based learning? Are we going to use worked examples? Are we going to do lecture, have video presentations? Are we going to have some kind of activity? What are we actually doing in our course? But this is where we bring in those instructional strategies. All right. Next, finally, we have assessment, which is our pre-test, post-test. And some examples, some delivery strategies I have for there are they going to do projects? You know, are they doing assignments? Is this verbal feedback? How are we assessing them? Is this a test? And then we go back to, you know, our assessment. You know, how are we really going to assess this? You know, what is the test? What is it? How are we doing this? And we should have that already from our you know, when we developed our objectives, we should know how we're assessing all this stuff, but how are we doing it? So that's where those strategies come in. And then finally, follow-through activities, which are memory aids for retention, transfer. What are we doing? What strategies are possible? What are we using? So I have some things listed, like have we developed a job aid? Is there some kind of follow-up instruction? Is there some kind of on-the-job practice, mentorship, assistantship, apprenticeship? Is there some kind of sandbox system? Sandbox system means like, so if I was teaching someone how to, use their new computer system, like their new learning management system, is there like a dummy system, a practice system that they can go in where they can't mess anything up and they can play around with it, almost like on a separate server. A lot of companies will have a sandbox system when they're installing something so that, people can practice using it before it's actually launched, that kind of thing. So is there something like that? So these are the kind of these are the strategies that we incorporate into Gagne's 9 events. We can incorporate all of these things into it. So, we have, and now the goal, once you see this relationship, is to start to say, okay, well, what is problem-based learning? And when do I use it? And why do I use it? And what is it? What is Keller Arcs? When do I use it? Why do I use it? And then we start to actually learn, okay, so here's how we start to combine all of this stuff. And there's even more once we get to development, right? Because we have multimedia theories and other stuff. So there's a bunch of things happening that we need to consider when we're designing and developing instruction, which is why I try to separate these out. Because what I'm finding is a student will tell me that they're going to use, a senior student will tell me they're going to use, their strategy is going to be problem-based learning. And I say, okay, who's defining where your objective should be? Is that part of the problem-based learning strategy that you're using? Is that defined there? It may or may not be, but if it's not, why aren't we got to go back and look at these organizational strategies and say, okay, am I doing this right? And so I just want to make sure that relationship is understood. Thank you.